AP Psych students, it's Megan here with Fiveable. Tonight we are reviewing some AP Psychology. As we review, just a couple of things to keep in mind. I do my best to monitor the chat there on the right-hand side, but if it gets moving too fast, I might miss your comments. If you have something related to the content and have a question about that, you have a handy little Ask a Question tab down at the bottom of your screen. You can put questions in there about the different content, or if you want a topic explained differently, and that'll notify me, and I will do my best to answer that question. As for tonight, we're doing sort of semester 2 review. We didn't get all the way through semester 1 last week, so we'll be doing a little bit of both, some semester 1, some semester 2. And as a little bonus, on Sunday, we're going to have an extra session that previously wasn't planned, but it is now. So Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern, so that's noon Central Time, I'll be reviewing whatever we don't get to tonight. So whatever units we don't quite get through, those were the ones I will cover on Sunday, most likely abnormal, therapy, social psych, and personality would be the ones that I cover on Sunday. So same sort of thing, register, sign up, and then we get into cram time Monday at 10 o'clock Eastern. We will be reviewing multiple choice. So basically, I'm just going to have a ton of multiple choice questions. We're going to go through them. It's like a little app kind of game thing that you'll be able to see, you'll be able to respond to. And then we can talk about ones that seem problematic or confusing. On Tuesday, we're devoted entirely to FRQ practice. So we will just do a bunch of different FRQs, look at the different styles, talk about strategy, things like that. And then Wednesday is kind of last minute cram time. I'm just going to go over a few tips and tricks that I have for taking the AP test. And then any last minute questions that you guys have, I will take and help you feel prepared for the test on Thursday. We are down to the wire. So I saw that there was a couple of questions in the chat already from today. I will attempt to show you guys an FAQ if we get enough time tonight. I do have one kind of booked at the end. Last time, though, we went a little long and we did not get to the FRQ, but I will try to get to it tonight. And then as for topics that we will be covering, today we're going to start with, now I'm blanking, states of consciousness, learning, cognition, and motivation and emotion. All right, so last week, there were a couple questions that I maybe didn't have clarity on or I didn't have a graphic for. And so the first thing I'm going to put up here is just the neurotransmitters. People were asking about this last week, and I know that that's one thing that is a little confusing or stressful for you guys. So I just have this chart. It's very similar to what's in the Myers textbook, but these are the 6 that you need to know. For sure for the AP test. They're the most common ones that pop up. And so if you know what the function or their purpose, as well as what their malfunction would cause. So like, for example, if you lose your acetylcholine receptors and it deteriorates over time, you may develop Alzheimer's disease. It's thought to have a link to that, which sort of makes sense when you look at acetylcholine being linked to muscle action, learning, and memory, and things like that. And so I'm not going to go through this whole chart, but if you want to screenshot it or take a picture of it, that might be useful for you later on, just because it puts all 6 of them together, tells you what they do, tells you what the problems associated with them are. And then just to recap, I felt like I didn't do a good job with agonist and antagonist last week, but agonist is something that mimics a neurotransmitter and binds to its receptor sites. So an agonist for serotonin would bind to serotonin receptor sites and mimic its response. So those are like other chemicals, drugs, things like that. Antagonists then, on the other hand, block neurotransmitter sites by binding to them. So if you think of like an antagonist in a book, they're kind of like sort of like the bad guy preventing the good guy from doing things. Antagonists are sort of the same thing. They block the neurotransmitter by binding to the receptor sites. Megan is asking if the graphics shown in here are on my website. Most of them are in the lecture slides. I use most of these at some point or another. However, I have lecture slides for basically every module, so you'd have to find them within my slides on the website. So they are usually typically in there. This one I don't think is, however, on there. So if you want this one, you better take a screenshot quick before I switch slides. All right, so that's neurotransmitters. You guys asked about that last week. The other thing that people asked about last week was how to kind of do the eye and the ear. I don't have a fancy mnemonic device to help you remember, but what I did was lay out the way that light passes through the eye or the way that sound passes through the ear, just to maybe give you a visual of how that works. So it starts through the cornea, and then the pupil, the lens, the retina, and the optic nerve. And so I just made a silly sentence up, which sometimes is helpful for remembering, but Chris plays Legos roughly outside. Chris cornea, plays pupil, Legos lens, roughly retina, outside optic nerve. I don't know. There's no necessarily super good way to remember it, but it says Chris. Sorry, I don't know if yours is cutting off and my screen I'm hovering over on the edge, but Chris plays Legos roughly outside. So that's what I have for remembering that, but maybe just seeing the visual of the order that they go in. And then knowing that the retina is also a bigger, not big, but made up of smaller parts like rods and cones, and then bipolar cells, ganglion cells, that sort of thing. Catherine, what, it looks like Catherine's saying she can't see the chart. What specifically are we not seeing? Like anything on this slide? Or what is going on? Can everyone see what's on this slide? So one of the questions here, and I'm going to see, Catherine, if you can tell me what you can't see, that would be helpful, is what creates the blind spot? And so the blind spot is where the optic nerve is leaving the eye. So basically, all of those ganglion cells bind together kind of at the back of your eye. And what happens is when it's exiting the back of your eye to go towards your brain, basically what happens is that's a blind spot because there's no receptor cells there, because that's where the cells going to your brain, or where the cells are leaving your brain. Okay, it looks like the suggestion is to refresh your page and come back in, and you might be able to see the slides. So hopefully that is helpful. And hopefully that answered your question about the blind spot. All right. And then for the ear, same sort of thing. I didn't have anything super fancy as well, but I did the same sort of thing. Sound travels through the outer ear and into the eardrum. And then the hammer, anvil, and stirrup are all sort of together. You don't really need to be able to distinguish like each little step that way. From there, it goes to the cochlea, and then to the basilar membrane, and then to the hair cells, and then the auditory nerve, which carries the message to the brain. So I made another sentence, again, not probably the best or most creative, but odd Erica has cooked bad hamburgers again. So outer ear, odd, eardrum, Erica, has, hammer, anvil, stirrup, cooked, cochlea, basilar membrane, bad, hair cells, hamburgers, auditory nerve, again. And maybe, again, this is just helpful to you for seeing how things play out. And Catherine, I'm going to quick message one of our Fiveable people to see if they have any suggestion about how else to help you view that. So give me 1 second. I'm going to message them because I'm not sure how to fix it if it's not working properly. Okay, so I messaged them. Hopefully I'll get an answer for you very quick. I will also share these slides. Actually, I can probably share the slides with you in a little bit, so that would also work, so you can view them on your computer as well. All right, other questions? Anna's asking a question about excitatory and inhibitory. So basically, excitatory is going to have to do with things like, let me go back here, like glutamate. It's an excitatory neurotransmitter, which means I don't know what else to say. It excites, and so it's one that like amps up. And then the inhibitory neurotransmitter, like GABA, slows things down. And so, for example, if you have too much glutamate and not enough GABA, you could have seizures and tremors because the GABA is what inhibits like too much neurotransmission and too much happening in your brain. And so if you don't have enough of it, you get like too much activity basically, which can cause seizures, tremors, things like that. And then the same thing with like glutamate, if you have a lot of that, because it's an excitatory one and it's in one that kind of like amps up, it could lead to migraines and seizures because you're getting too much activity. So that's sort of where the inhibitory and excitatory come in, and that would mostly be associated with GABA and glutamate. So hopefully that answers your question. All right, so we reviewed the neurotransmitters from last time. We just did some quick eye and ear mnemonics, and then we're going to move on now to states of consciousness. So this is my broad overview for this unit. So if you take a look, there are kind of two main things that you need to know from this unit, and it's things to do with sleep and it's things to do with drugs. It's a pretty small unit. It's only 2 to 4% of the AP test. And so really that's the part that I would focus on studying. So for sleep, you need to know the stages, and they're listed here on this picture. NREM 1 is kind of our like earliest sleep stage. We're technically, it's called a sleep stage, but you're pretty awake at that point. NREM 2 is as you fall into a more solid sleep, and then NREM 3, which you can see the delta waves there. Those are like our low, long sleep waves. This is when you're like out like a light, you're in a deep sleep, and it would be difficult to wake you up. So it just literally goes 1, 2, 3 as in like levels of sleep. We then go up to REM sleep, which is where we dream. And REM sleep, if you look at the waves there on the right-hand side of your screen, they look almost like you're awake, but that's when you're dreaming. So basically, your brain kind of looks awake, but your body is paralyzed. And so the brain is doing a bunch of stuff, but your body is relaxed and sleeping. So make sure you just know the different sleep stages, kind of what each one is and what happens at each one. There's some basic theories of the function of sleep, like we sleep to make memories, we sleep to heal our bodies, we sleep to practice things from the day before, and that's why we dream, things like that. So just familiarize yourself with the theories. There's none that I think are super, they don't have fancy names and they're not super important, but just being able to recognize the difference between them. And what I'm going to do right now is throw this link into the chat so that Catherine, if you're still having trouble, and if anyone else is having trouble, that's not going to be... All right, I'm just copying the link for you right now, which you can probably see on my screen. So if you're having trouble or if you got here late, you should be able to follow along on these slides. And then we have a couple questions here in the chat. Madeline's asking if REM sleep comes after NREM 3. So typically what happens is you go down from the deep NREM 3, you start to come up a little, and you hit like NREM 2 again briefly, and then you go up to REM. But you only hit the NREM once. The NREM 1 is once when you're falling asleep. It's like that in-between stage where like when you kind of jerk awake sometimes, you're like half in, half out. But you'll go like NREM 1, 2, 3, maybe briefly back to 2, and then you hit the REM sleep, and then back to 2 and 3, 2 and REM, and that's how you go throughout the night. NREM 2 is not the same as NREM 4. Jay is asking that question. And NREM 4 does not exist anymore. So make sure that you know that. They changed it a year or 2 ago, and so NREM 3 and NREM 4 have been combined into one sleep stage. And that will be on the AP test. You will not see NREM 4 on the AP test. That's old information. So yeah, don't worry about NREM 4. And so NREM 3 is the like lowest or deepest sleep stage, I guess, that exists at this point. And then, yep, what Taylor put in the chat is exactly right. 1, 2, 3, 2 REM, 2, 3, 2 REM. Yep, etc. Good. Other stuff in this unit, sleep disorders. I think the sleep disorders are pretty easy. Apnea is when you like have trouble breathing. You might like cough yourself awake. Insomnia is like lack of sleep or not being able to get restful sleep. Narcolepsy is falling into like a deep sleep in the middle of just day-to-day activities. And then night terrors are a disorder that we mostly see in children, different than nightmares. Nightmares are dreams. Dreams occur in REM sleep. Night terrors actually occur in deep delta wave sleep and mostly seen in children. And then, like I said, there's some theories of why we dream. Again, I don't know that there's anything super specific that you need to know about that, but like the movie, for example, Inside Out suggests that we dream to consolidate our day's memories. That is one of the theories of dreaming, to consolidate memories. So just kind of recognizing that there's different theories about it. We don't necessarily have all the answers about why we do those things. And then lastly, the drugs. You need to know what are stimulants. That would be things like nicotine or amphetamines. Depressants, those are like barbiturates and alcohol. And hallucinogens, which would be LSD, and technically marijuana is also considered a mild hallucinogenic drug. So those are the kind of big categories of things that you should review from this unit. I'm just looking in the questions now. Okay. Ria, I think I just answered your question. I gave a few examples of each type of drug, so hopefully you got that. If that's what you were talking about for those like stimulants, depressants, and hallucinogens. For disorders, it looks like I will get to that probably on Sunday, so we can talk more about that then. The difference between alpha and beta waves, basically like alpha waves is when you're, it's more like, you can see it's more rapid. You're at a more like alert or excited state, versus like waking beta is like you're just kind of normal baseline waves, I would say, beta baseline. The alpha waves are the more like agitated, like excited state. And Taylor, I'm pretty sure it says that night terrors are occurring. They don't occur in REM. They occur in NREM 3, according to what my textbook says. So we can double check on that later, but I just want to make sure we're having the correct information, because the difference between night terrors and nightmares is where they're occurring. I will double check that in a little bit, but just kind of keep that in mind. Okay, so that was that question. Let me see if there's any other questions related to this unit. I did share the PowerPoint in the chat. And so if you look, it's linked up there. It should work. Hopefully you guys can see that. Genesis is asking if you need to know the alpha and beta waves on the diagram. I don't think I've ever seen brain waves diagrammed on the AP test. Doesn't mean it can't happen. But I don't think I've ever seen them on there. So I would probably say probably not. But watch, now it'll be on there this year. Emily's asking why the delta waves are so tall. It's because there's less, I guess, brain activity at that point. It's just slower moving waves because you're in such a deep sleep that there's just not as much neural activity shooting around, electricity in your brain. Enzo's asking if you need to know the average amount of time that one goes through each phase of sleep. I don't think you need to know like specific times. But what you should know is that as the night progresses, your delta sleep gets less and that your REM sleep gets longer. So at first you need, like, think about it, when you first go to sleep, you are very tired and you need a lot more of that deep, restful sleep. But as the night progresses, you are getting less of that restful sleep because you've already maybe gotten enough. And so then you spend more time in the other stages, specifically in REM sleep. So I could see them possibly asking that question, and that would be typical. But I don't think they're ever going to say, like, how many minutes do you spend in each stage? And then Manal, you're asking, which do we spend the most time in again? It kind of depends how long you're sleeping, but typically you'd start longer in, again, the delta range or in the NREM3 stage. And then the REM stage is getting longer as the longer you sleep. So probably REM out of all of those three. Good question. Other questions? Levels of consciousness we'll talk about in the personality unit. If that's what you're talking about. Otherwise, I'm not sure. Yeah, I think that's what you're talking about. And then Darby's asking, what are sleep spindles? Sleep spindles occur in NREM2. And so this is sometimes something they'll ask about. And it's just like a rapid burst of brain activity. And it could be in that kind of falling asleep stage. But basically what you need to know for sleep spindles is that they occur in NREM2. And they're just all of a sudden a little rapid burst of activity that would pop up. And I apologize. I think alpha is the relaxed and beta is the alert state. I apologize. I think I said those backwards now that I'm thinking on that. Did I say that backwards? Alpha is your relaxed conscious state and beta is your alert state. Hopefully I did not say those backwards, but if I did, I'm correcting myself right now. All right. Okay. Any other questions about this unit? Okay, we did sleep spindles. Social psychology will probably be on Sunday. How do we remember which waves go with which stages? I think I said a little bit earlier, I'm not positive that I don't think you're gonna need to match the like picture with the number. But basically if you had to, like, the waves get deeper the further we fall asleep. NREM 1 is a little more spiky. NREM 2, you start to get some bigger oscillations. And then NREM 3 is the like biggest, deepest sleep waves. But again, I wouldn't stress about that. And then someone's asking about parasomnia. I'm not positive. I'm trying to look right now. We don't talk about parasomnia, and I have not seen it in a textbook, so I'm not sure that you need to know that, but I can come back to that next time as well, if that is a question. Okay. Can you go more in depth? Jay's asking about hallucinogens. Basically, the gist of what you need to know for hallucinogens are that basically they can cause you to hallucinate. And so in absence of sensory input. So for example, if I take LSD, I would possibly see spiders coming out of the wall. Obviously, that sensory input isn't there, but the way the LSD interacts with like my brain is that it's causing me to see things that actually aren't there. And then I don't know that you need to know much beyond that. Typically speaking, for the drug classifications, if it's an amphetamine or it's a stimulant, you just need to know that it like affects your nervous system and like amps those things up, like your heart rate, your breathing, things like that. If it's a depressant, it does the opposite. It slows down your body functioning. But again, beyond that, I don't think you need to know super big specifics about how the drugs are interacting with your body and your brain. Catherine's asking if dream theories are going to be on the exam or has it been a past FRQ. I cannot remember dream theories being on an FRQ or the exam, besides possibly seeing the term like latent content, which is latent or manifest content, which are Freud's theories about what we dream. The latent content is like the hidden meaning behind your dream. Like, for example, that would be the like, a gun represents a penis, according to Freud, right? So if there's a gun in your dream, Freud's going to tell you that there's something weird going on there in your subconscious. Otherwise, specific theories, I doubt that you will see questions about. And if there was a question, there may be like one question. It's just not a big topic because there's so many theories about it, and we're not really sure with a lot of them. All right. The most common types of drugs, stimulants, you need to know nicotine, and amphetamines like meth, meth. For depressants, the most common that you would need to know is barbiturates, opiates, or alcohol, and then hallucinogens would be marijuana or LSD. I doubt they would ask you about any other specific types of drugs. All right. Paradoxal sleep is, yes, just another word for REM sleep. You are correct. And then I'm going to look more into the parasomnia question. Okay. All right. We are going to move on. States of consciousness. Good questions. You guys are firing on all cylinders. I appreciate that. So quickly, here's just the review question. Raphael has a sleep disorder for which he takes medically prescribed amphetamines. Which of the following sleep disorders is Raphael most likely being treated? So in the polls question, or in the polls section at the bottom of your screen, you can anonymously vote for what you think the answer is to this question. I'm just going to give you like 30 seconds. This is just a quick unit wrap up or unit review. So Raphael, sleep disorder, he's taking amphetamines. What sleep disorder might he be being treated for? And again, in the poll, it's anonymous, so you can just throw it in there. You don't have to be shy about it, because if you're wrong, nobody will know. Give you like 20 more seconds. So yeah, the answer for this one is B, narcolepsy. So you had to kind of put together your sleep knowledge and your dream or your drug knowledge to answer this question. Amphetamines keep you up, keep you alert, keep you awake. Narcolepsy makes you fall asleep. And so those two, if you're having trouble staying awake, your doctor may prescribe you amphetamines to keep you awake. Probably not the best solution, but something that could happen. We're going to skip that one. So the next unit that we're going to talk about is the learning unit. And people asked about this last time, so I have a second slide here that's going to diagram some of the information. And I see already that I don't. Oh, yeah, that is right. Okay. So for classical conditioning, you need to know Pavlov and everything to do with Pavlov and his classical conditioning. You need to, and this is probably the hardest part of the whole unit, know about the neutral stimulus, the unconditioned stimulus, the unconditioned response, the conditioned stimulus, and the conditioned response, and then the famous experiment with Watson and little Albert. For observational learning, you need to know the name Bandura and mirror neurons. Those are probably the two biggest things for that. And then for operant conditioning, you need to know Skinner, positive versus negative reinforcement and what that means, different types of reinforcers, like a primary versus a secondary, an immediate versus a delayed, and then continuous versus intermittent schedules, as well as positive and negative punishment. So I'm going to kind of let you guys ask questions about this unit. And I have this slide for classical conditioning, because I know last week somebody asked about it, so I put this together. So for me, when I have to answer a question about this, I always have to write it out, and I would strongly suggest that you write it out. I know you're in like crunch time on the AP test, but if you just write out like US for unconditioned stimulus and UR for unconditioned response, labeling it really helps you answer the question. And so I would strongly suggest anytime that you have a question about classical conditioning that you label the parts, which makes it easier. So for example, for under conditioning, I will go through each one. I'll kind of go through the steps here for classical conditioning. So before any conditioning takes place, I have something that elicits a response already. So if I'm going to train my dog to salivate at the sound of a bell, I have to pick something that's already making him salivate. So for example, food. If I place food in front of my dog, he will start to salivate. There's no conditioning or training needed. That's a natural response that happens. And so when you're doing classical conditioning, it has to involve an instinctual sort of response. It has to be something that's natural or instinctual. And so the unconditioned stimulus is the food, and the unconditioned response is the salivation, because I haven't had to do anything there. I put the food down, my dog drools. And then the neutral stimulus is the bell. Because if I ring a bell in front of my dog's face right now, he's going to look at me and be like, what? That means nothing to me. However, we do this thing called conditioning, and acquisition happens. That's the middle part there. And so then I ring the bell and set the food down, and then the dog starts to salivate. So for a while, I ring the bell, put the food down, the dog salivates. Ring the bell, put the food down, the dog salivates. After this acquisition happens, the dog no longer needs the food to salivate because he starts to associate the bell with the food. And so the neutral stimulus, the bell, the thing that once meant nothing, now has become a conditioned stimulus. It's been conditioned to respond to the bell with its salivation. Does that make sense? I'm hoping that that is, making sense for you. So the neutral stimulus always becomes the conditioned stimulus, and the unconditioned response always becomes the conditioned response if classical conditioning occurred, if that makes sense. So Manal's asking, before acquisition, there is no conditioned stimulus. Correct. It's just a neutral stimulus because until you've conditioned it, that bell doesn't mean anything to the dog. And, you can use other examples as well. Thanks for linking that again, Erin. That is helpful. So hopefully that helps make sense. Again, I have to write it out because it does get confusing. I totally get that because it's conditioned, unconditioned, stimulus, response. All of those things are confusing. And so if you write it out or label it, that would be helpful. Jess in the chat just asked the difference between classical and operant conditioning. So if we go back here, classical conditioning is when we have a sort of stimulus and then the response. So we have, it has to typically do with things that are instinctual. So like unlearned, right? You don't like learn to salivate at food and things like that. So we have the stimulus and then the response. In operant conditioning, we do something and then there's a response. There's a reinforcer or a punishment. So the order is sort of switched around as well. Darby's asking, does the neutral stimulus come before the unconditioned stimulus? When we are doing acquisition, yes. If I'm training my dog to salivate at the bell, I do the bell, which is the neutral stimulus, the food, which is the unconditioned stimulus, and then I get the unconditioned response. Lizzie's asking, operant conditioning is behavior. Yes, I mean, technically we could argue that all of these things are behavior, but it's voluntary behavior, I think would be the best word if I put in there. Operant conditioning is a voluntary behavior. Classical conditioning is an instinct or an involuntary response. All right, looking at some of these questions. Mirror neurons are in what we see in observational learning. And so basically the premise behind mirror neurons is that if I'm watching you tie your shoe, for example, if I'm a little kid watching you tie your shoe, the parts of my brain that would help me tie a shoe are actually activated just watching you do it. And so this is sort of the premise behind observational learning, is that how we learn to do things by watching other people is because our brain is mimicking what they're doing. And that's why it's called like mirror neurons. It's like you're looking in a mirror, you're mimicking what's happening. And so that is basically the gist of what you need to know. So little kids watch you do something, and it doesn't have to be a little kid, but you're watching someone do something. Your brain is sort of mimicking the same thing. And that's how we start to learn, through observation. Good question. Okay. All right, so we have questions about intermittent versus delayed reinforcers. So if we look here, in operant conditioning, we don't always reward or reinforce a behavior. So for example, a continuous reinforcement would be every time I tell my dog sit, I give him a treat. Sit, treat, sit, treat. My dog's gonna get mad at me because I'm saying treat and he's not getting a treat, but that's okay. Intermittent reinforcement then is you only do it some of the time. And so it really depends on what you're training. So for animals and little kids, you usually have to start with a continuous reinforcement so that they learn to associate whatever you're doing right away. And then you can back off to more of an intermittent reinforcement. But continuous helps you learn more quickly, but then it also extinguishes the behavior more quickly. Yep, Jay, you answered that question about Bandura for Maria. That is perfect. Good. Thank you for doing that. Bandura and Bobo Doll go together, so that's always helpful. B and B. All right. Can you explain why money is not an example of a token economy, but fake money and poker chips are? I would say that money is like a secondary reinforcer. So that is something that you can use to get like primary reinforcers. My best answer to that is that like fake money and poker chips aren't actually like used to purchase something. It's more of a reward. Like remember when you were little kids and you got like stickers, and if you filled up your sticker chart, you got a reward. That's more of an example of a token economy, whereas actual money, you can go out and spend it and buy like primary reinforcers, which would be like food and things like that. Hopefully, I think that's what you were asking. So hopefully that answered your question, Genesis. If you guys have questions you for sure want to get answered, can you put them in the Ask a Question tab here? Because you're going kind of fast on the right-hand side, and I'm afraid I am missing people's questions. Okay. I see one in there. Can you explain Skinner's thing, please? So the big thing that you need to know about Skinner is that he learned that he trained like pigeons in particular, and basically he learned that by reinforcing a behavior, and so for example with the bird, it was like when they did what he wanted, he gave them a treat. So that's like positive reinforcement. Then they would continue to do that behavior. And so he used things like shaping, which is like slowly building towards the behaviors. And yeah, he just kind of gave us the premise of a lot of what we know about operant conditioning. And like I said, specifically, pigeons were one of the big things that he used in his training. Okay. Looks like that question was answered. People are asking about whether you can go back and watch the video, and you can only go back and watch it if you are a Fiveable member. So I think I'm not sure what the cost is off the top of my head right now, but it's not super expensive. Otherwise, you have a link to my slides. You can go back and at least look at the slides. Other classical conditioning questions. Just a refresher on Bandura. Again, Bandura had the Bobo doll experiment, and basically what he did was he put kids in a room with an adult and this like blow up doll, and they would watch the adult beat up the blow up doll. What they found afterwards was that kids then who were asked to play with toys like the Bobo doll were more aggressive in also playing with it. So basically they learned through observation by watching the adult this aggressive, angry behavior towards the Bobo doll. He also did further experiments which showed that like little boys watching an adult man, it had more of an impact on, or little girls watching an adult woman, it had more of an impact on. And so it kind of plays into this idea of like gender and how we relate to people. So if you relate, basically the more you relate to the person that you're observing, the stronger that learning is that happens in that situation. So that's the gist of Bandura and Bobo doll. Okay, question about positive and negative reinforcement and positive and negative punishment. So the biggest thing that you have to remember about positive and negative reinforcement and positive and negative punishment is that positive does not necessarily mean good, and negative does not necessarily mean bad. So positive reinforcement, when we see the word reinforcement, it means we're encouraging a behavior. And there's two different ways we can encourage it, through a positive manner or through the negative manner. Positive means adding something in. So this is an example would be every time you take out the garbage, your parents give you $5. You do the behavior, then they add something in after the behavior that is going to make you likely to continue it. So by giving you the $5, they've added money into the equation, which is more likely than that you'll continue to take out the garbage every Wednesday night or whenever you take out the garbage. Negative reinforcement is still encouraging a behavior. The typical one that I see with this is like, I have a headache, so I'm going to do the behavior of taking an aspirin. I take the aspirin. What does the aspirin do? It removes the headache from the situation. Therefore, I'm more likely to continue to take aspirin in the future. It reinforces that behavior. Another example would be my little kid is whining at the grocery store. I want a candy bar. I want a candy bar. I want a candy bar. So my behavior is buying my child that candy bar. And then by doing that, I am removing the negative, or not negative, sorry, I shouldn't have said negative. I'm getting rid of the whining. So therefore, in the future, I will most likely buy the candy bar again because it got rid of the whining the last time. So that's how I would think about it. Positive is you're adding something into the situation that's likely to increase the behavior. Negative reinforcement is removing something from the situation. Punishment then. Punishment is we're trying to discourage a behavior. Reinforcement is encouraging. Punishment is discouraging. So positive punishment would be like a little kid runs out into the street. So you don't want them to do it again, right? So what do? You spank them on the butt. You're adding in the spanking, positive, adding something in to discourage the behavior of them running in the street. Negative punishment then would be, we could use the same example. A little kid runs into the street. You put them in a timeout. So you're taking away their freedom in that case, so that in the future, they aren't likely to run out into the street again. So I think, yeah, the biggest thing is getting rid of, like, changing your viewpoint on what that positive and negative mean. But reinforcement means encouraging a behavior. Punishment means getting rid of or preventing. Okay, we had that question. Dara's asking, would adding an extra chore for not doing the dishes be a positive reinforcement? No. So it's well, because you didn't do the dishes. So I'm trying to encourage you. Would adding an extra chore for not doing the dishes be a positive reinforcement? It would not be positive reinforcement because we're not trying to reinforce the behavior of not doing the dishes. It would be punishment. That would be the correct answer there, because we're trying to discourage that behavior. Good question. We did that. Oh, so I saw, where did it go? It just jumped on me here. Fixed versus interval ratio. Okay, so the different reinforcement schedules here on the right-hand side, FR is fixed ratio and FI is fixed interval. So fixed means like a set amount, and then ratio means number of times, interval means amount of time. So just to give you an example of each of these, fixed ratio is like every time you like a punch card to like Starbucks. Every time you go to Starbucks and get a latte, they punch your punch card, and every 10th latte is free. That's fixed ratio. It's a set number of times that you do something, and then it's reinforced. Every 10 lattes I buy, I then get my free one, and so that's reinforced. Fixed interval is a set amount of time has to pass before something can happen again. So that would be like a weekly quiz that you have, or a monthly appointment that you have. Those are fixed intervals. It has to be a set amount of time versus set number of times. So hopefully that answered that question. We did that. All right, so this is a question. Can you explain the difference between modeling, observational learning, and social approach theory? Because they all require learning through observation and then imitating behavior. So modeling is more so like I'm showing you what to do. Like I'm modeling this behavior for you. So I'm trying to teach you through observational learning, basically. Modeling is like referring to the person kind of doing the teaching, I would say. And then observational learning is like I'm watching what you're doing and picking up on it. And then social approach theory or social learning theory is more, I don't want to say abstract, but it's like I pick up on social cues from watching TV. Like I might pick up on gender roles from watching TV, and I might, if I watched a lot of like I Love Lucy back in the 1950s, I might think that women's roles were being a housewife and men's roles were being like out earning money. And so it's more like subtle, I guess would be the right way. It's just that you're observing like society and things around you, and you pick up on what different things should be, like gender roles, different professional roles, how certain people act, things like that. So good question. I think, okay, so about variable ratio and variable interval. Very variable then here under the continuous and intermittent reinforcement schedules. Variable ratio refers then to a random amount of times, and variable interval is a random amount of time. So variable ratio is like playing like slot machines. You don't know how many times you have to hit the gamble button before you're going to win big. So variable, you don't know, ratio, number of times. You have to hit it. You can't just sit staring at a slot machine and eventually it's going to hit. You have to do it a certain number of times, but you don't know how many times. Variable interval is you don't know the amount of time that it will take. So that could be like fishing, right? You cast your reel and you're just letting your bait float around in the water, and you sit and you wait and you wait and you wait. Eventually a fish is going to hit, but you don't know how much time has to pass. It could be a minute, it could be 10 minutes, it could be an hour, it could be 10 days. Eventually, in theory, a fish will bite, but you don't know when. So hopefully that was helpful for that. Okay. All right, I'm going to move on. Let's see. I'm going to talk about the FRQ, and then we will probably finish with that since a lot of upvotes on the FRQ question. So what I will show you is, well, I'm not sure if I'll show you. We'll talk about it. So basically, what are the most common topics that FRQs will ask? They tend to do a lot of research-based questions. Obviously, I don't know. I can't guarantee. I don't know ahead of time what is going to be on the exam. But there usually is one, or very often there is one that focuses on a research component. And it could look a variety of ways. It may give you a scenario with like an experiment or a study, and then it might have you like identify parts of it. It might give you data and then ask you to interpret the data. And even once in a while, it might ask you to actually like draw a table or graph that represents the data that they give you. That's pretty rare, but that has also happened. So I would say that if you feel comfortable with the research methods unit, so the different like parts of an experiment, the dependent and independent variable and stuff like that, that's probably a safe thing to do. Again, I can't guarantee that. You know, who knows if it will be on there this year or not, but I know that that is a focus of theirs. Occasionally, they may give you a bunch of information, like somebody wants to study the effects of chocolate on obesity. Design an experiment that they could do this for. And then you actually have to design the experiment. That's also fairly rare. But you would basically, they would say, like, what are the dependent and independent variables? And then you'd have to basically say, a dependent variable is da 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 da. In this experiment, my dependent variable would be da 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 da. That sort of thing. Again, those are all possibilities. They haven't done that in a few years. I haven't seen that on the EP test, but it has happened in the past. So I don't know for sure what's coming. But if you're going to hedge your bets, scientific and research methods is probably your best way to hedge them. And then like the other question is usually just a more standard question. It gives you some scenario about somebody doing something, and it says, okay, apply these terms to the scenario. That one's usually a little more straightforward. So yeah, that is typically what you would expect. As for common terms, if you go on my website here, I will show you. If you scroll down, there's this Quizlet called the Essential 427, and it's the 427 most common terms that have appeared on the AP exam. That doesn't mean necessarily on the FRQ, but the person who did this researched this. It's a few years old, so I don't know like when it was last updated because I didn't make the Quizlet, but it is there. And if you want to have like a general idea, 400 terms is still a lot, but when we have over like 1,000 in our whole textbook, it can narrow it down a little bit for the ones that you tend to see more often. Yes, let me do that. I will put this right here. Where are we at here? So feel free to look at that. There's practice tests and stuff on there as well. Things for you to look at. Other questions, because I don't think it's going to pay for us to jump into another unit right now because we are only got 6 minutes left. So if you have any other questions, otherwise, like I said, next time we'll continue. We got through learning, so we didn't get super far, but we'll do some cognition and some of the other units that we haven't covered yet. We might not get all the way through then all of the units just because, oops, sorry, I'm like messing with the screen, just because these are, going, you guys have a lot of questions, which is good. But there's also the other review sessions. I'll put that up right now so we can take a peek at them. As a reminder, Sunday, 1 o'clock Eastern, I will be here kind of doing the same thing, showing you a unit outline and then taking your questions. Monday, it'll just be a whole bunch of multiple choice. Tuesday, FRQ. Wednesday, cram time, which would be another time for you to ask a bunch of questions. It looks like there was a new question. I'm just looking on here. Sure, we can take the last 4 minutes to look at a practice FRQ. Someone just posted that, so let me go here. So this is an FRQ from a few years ago. This is the scenario. This was a really just basic one. This is not a research necessarily based one, but it says, in response to declining reading scores in schools, John wrote an editorial suggesting that schools need to increase interest in reading books by providing students with incentives. Based on research showing a relationship between use of incentives and student reading, he recommended providing a free pizza coupon for every 10 books a student reads. And so oftentimes FRQs have part A, part B, and part C. So you need to read very carefully. I just deleted part A because I didn't want to focus on that. But you need to read what each part is asking of you because it's usually different. So part B is asking us to explain how schedules of reinforcement can be used to strengthen John's plan. So this is perfect because we were just talking about them. Schedules of reinforcement is that like continuous versus intermittent, variable ratio, things like that. So if we're going to use that to strengthen John's plan, we have to pick one that's going to help students want to read more. So I always start with having my students define what it is. So schedules of reinforcement refers to a specific ways we can encourage a behavior through a system of rewards. In this case, I would recommend a fixed variable reinforcement schedule. So you have to label it and talk about what specifically, which reinforcement schedule you're choosing. So you have to be specific, first of all. Second of all, you can say fixed variable reinforcement schedules. I'm telling you what it is. Reward or reinforce a behavior after a set number of responses. So that is the definition of fixed variable. Oh, I said fixed variable. It should be fixed ratio. I apologize. That's a typo in there. And I'll throw my slides in a second, okay? So like John has suggested, if a student reads 10 books, they should be given a reward. This type of reinforcement schedule leads to a steady response cycle. Therefore, it would strengthen the desired behavior. So you're explaining how that has led to what you've wanted it to. And so this might be helpful. This is what a key looks like. I know it's kind of small, but I wanted to put it all on one slide. So the people grading your FRQs are going to look at this key, and they're going to see if your answer fits the response. So the first thing they're looking for is, did the student, at part A, did the student identify a schedule of reinforcement? Variable interval, fixed schedule, intermittent, etc. Or did the student describe a schedule of reinforcement that enhances the reading plan? And then they always have some notes there. For example, mere mention of the reinforcement is not sufficient. You must name it or describe it. So that's why I put a name to it. You have to be specific in your FRQ. They're not going to guess if you know what you're talking about or not. You have to be explicit. This is interesting. You can earn a point by actually describing but mislabeling it. So if you put the wrong title on it, you can still earn the point as long as you described it correctly. So in FRQs, unless you are contradicting yourself, wrong information does not necessarily hurt you unless you've like completely contradicted what you've said. So that's good to know. And then they give some examples of what would have scored. John should use a fixed interval schedule because, et cetera, because the should implies an alternative. And then it also says, do not score at the bottom. It gives examples of that as well. So on FRQ night, we'll look at a few of these in detail and go over what would score, what wouldn't score. We'll look at different types of like ones that are research-based, ones that aren't, and we'll just have a bunch of different things to look at. So hopefully that was a little bit helpful for you guys. Otherwise, I think that's it. It's 8 o'clock, so it kind of reached the end of our time. I did promise I'm going to throw my slides in, so if you're hanging out looking for my slides from last week, I will do that right now. As soon as I find it, I will link it. Oh, where is it? Sorry, there's like a million folders here to get through. Semester 1 review. Shareable link. Copy. And paste. So like I said, next time then on Sunday, we'll get through as much more of the review as we can. And then we'll head into some more specific multiple choice FRQ review. Genesis, that's a good question. Any of the schedules would score as long as you talk about how they are enhancing a student's ability to read. As long as you can explain why it would lead you to an increased reading schedule, it should work. I can't think of one off the top of my head that would be like, nope, that won't work. You just have to use it correctly in the situation. So thank you guys for asking all of your questions. I did my best. You guys are firing lots of things at me, but you guys are great. I appreciate that. And I will hopefully see you guys on Sunday for some more review. Have a great rest of your week, and I will see you then.